record to cloud. Well, Mike, thank you so much for helping me in my project. I was wondering if we could start out by you telling us a little bit about yourself.
I'm right now I'm studying and I'm in a course for aviation mechanics, try to get some skills, practical skills. That way I can hopefully in the future work on spacecraft, be one of the white room workers, helping to assemble and construct the spacecraft before the send off.
That's awesome. And I was also seeing in your Twitter account, you wanted to be uh, a space reporter as well.
Yes, I know there's a lot of bias and there is some differing opinions, and I definitely want to help to just provide a more direct and a more open-ended, because because like I said, there's a lot of bias. There's still some amazing things going on, and right now, especially 2020, is probably by far one of the most exciting decades in spaceflight we've had since the 60s, since the shuttle started flying. It's an incredible time for us, and even there's a lot of people taking sides, one rocket over another, but I am open-ended, and I want to also be direct, and I also just I want to be honest about it. There are problems, but there are also a lot of promise here, so I just want to tackle both ends.
That sounds good. And you talk about a lot of bias. Could you talk about kind of like the bias you see? I mean, like what's the nature of it?
The bias typically isn't too horrible. It's just that the reporters they're a little bit too critical of one rocket while trying to avoid that critical thinking of another. And I don't want to pick out names because I feel it's, inappropriate to do so. But a lot of them like pick sides, saying that, attacking SLS for being so exceptionally expensive when, Starship might be cheaper, but it has a lot of problems. They're making a lot of high promises. And it's also a big problem with SpaceX is a lot of their big promises, they're an industry leader. When they make their promises, others expect them to meet up to it. So when they fall short, the whole industry kind of suffers for it. So.
And what do you think drives that bias?
I think it's just political dissatisfaction with the way that the government handles operations. They want more result. They're wanting to be more result driven, wanting to see things immediate, despite immediate results sometimes not being the best, especially for government, which can't, with SpaceX, they can be open with failures because there's no one going to pull funding. If say NASA with SLS, has those same kind of results of exploding rockets, they'll lose funding. They can't afford to go with that kind of thinking. And although, certain testing regimes work, it's just a matter of how well it works for the rocket in question. And for SLS and its testing regime, it's very basic, but it's very direct with the green run and the static structural testing articles that they've been working with. They're very single purpose, and SpaceX is doing great work with their SN rockets, but they aren't getting very far. And I feel that if they don't change their tactics here in the near future, they're kind of reach the limit of how much that can do, and they're going to get more complicated problems more than they can solve them. Sorry.
So I guess, when did you hear about NASA's plans to send people back to the moon in 2024?
Probably right around the same time, because I had started following aerospace probably 2012, 2013, right about there. And ever since I have been following it pretty closely. So um, when I heard it, I was definitely pretty excited. It was definitely an ambitious goal. It's one that kind of took me by surprise, but I do know that the biggest issue with SLS has been a lack of ambition, a lack of interest. It's just been meeting deadlines. It's just been trying to meet, milestone goals, trying to, go one step after another. And they haven't been trying to, it's not been a purpose. There's been no heart to the program until Jim Bridenstine has unveiled the new Artemis program. Once he did that, the whole program started to, a lot of ambition, a lot of interest. And now I feel that, well, not only just the aerospace industry, but there's a lot more interest to go to the moon in general.
And, I mean, Bridenstine talks about the reason to pull up the date from 2028 to 2024 is to try to reduce some of those political risks that are inherent into space. Do you think moving into 2024 will help to reduce some of those risks, or do you think it's just as much at risk now, depending upon what happens in November?
Undoubtedly there's going to be some there's going to be some definite questions about it going forward after November. But thankfully, both sides of the House want Artemis and both sides want SLS. Now, there could be slight changes, additional tests, or shifting in funding that could impact it. But in the end, I think it's still better because even if we miss 2024 by a year, I feel that that's 2025, and that's so much better than 2028. And I feel that if they give themselves an excuse for 2028, they're going to use it and they're going to try to stretch it another year to 2029. So any movement forward in trying to put pressure, it gets us back sooner than we could any other time.
And what do you think about those that say, why are we going to the moon? We've already done that.
Well, for anyone who asks that, they don't truly understand anything about the Apollo program. The Apollo program was in an era where our understanding of science was so much more limited. Our understanding of the universe and the moon is so much more basic. But more importantly, the biggest thing about the Apollo program, especially by 1972, when we were reaching the ends of Apollo 17, we were already reaching the ends of the limitation of that technology, the limitations of the hardware. We would have needed to build completely Okay, am I back?
Still there? Yeah, it looked like
Okay,
you
sorry.
froze for a little bit. So you're talking about we were reaching the ends of the capabilities of the Apollo program, and in
Yes.
order to extend it further, that's where you cut out.
Am I working? I'm working.
No, it looks like you're frozen.
See if I can. You want to fix that or just continue?
Okay. So you were talking about reaching the ends of the capabilities of the Apollo program?
Yes. And like I said, just we would have needed new hardware, new vehicles. If you look at the Apollo applications program, it started needing whole Saturn V's just to launch, either cargo lunar modules that would have had to land autonomously, or you would have needed other it would have required more larger Saturn V's, and the price was going to skyrocket, which at the time was the biggest problem with the program, is that running out of money in the government, with a looming recession, that we just couldn't afford to put that kind of risk, that kind of put that much weight in our government at that time.
Yeah, and I guess, one thing about space exploration is sort of what's the ultimate goal and what's the ultimate vision. And in your most optimistic view, kind of like how far, like, what do you see as the potential of the space program? Do you see it as kind of like a neat scientific and engineering and political thing, or do you see it as eventually having humanity extend out into the solar system?
I definitely can see it's kind of intertwined ever since the very beginning. It's been very politicized, and it's never going to not be. Just like exploration all throughout history, even just exploring the new world has been involved with new government bodies, and that's not going to change. However, the government is going to keep pushing those boundaries. It's going to keep reaching further into deeper space. But while they do that, commercial is going to be what's changing the ground and is going to be bringing space flight closer than ever before, and we will slowly distance ourselves from those limitations, and it will become more easily accessible. Because if you look at the FAA nowadays, they're making mandates and they're making new amendments trying to keep up with the new growth in commercial space, with new suborbital rockets and even potentially subspace travel.
Yeah, Elon talks about one of his personal goals is to build a city on Mars by like 2050. Aside from his method of getting there and the possibilities of it actually happening, do you see a city on Mars as a worthwhile achievement for humanity, or do you just see it as kind of like maybe a bridge too far or misguided?
It is a bit of a distant goal. It definitely seems a bit far-fetched, but at the same, depending on his definition, a couple hundred people, that's possible. But he does make a lot of promises that are by far easily said to be far-fetched. One of the biggest ideas he's put forth is Earth to Earth. And I know I'm diverging from your comment about Mars, but his biggest thing with Earth to Earth is there are too many problems with getting it to actually operate, because the limitations, the amount of training you require, and the amount of training you require, the lack of access. So, I mean, could he, again, going back to your original point, could he build a city on Mars? Very possibly by 2040 or 2050. Again, that's very iffy, but it's a good goal to at least put ourselves to. Like I said with Jim Bryan's son, at least getting that goal is a good thing, and it will benefit humanity so much, because it'll just by allowing us to survive. It's the big thing about space exploration. A lot of people ask, is NASA worth the money we pay for it? And a lot of people say, oh, that 20 billion they get could be used elsewhere, but the problem is that 20 billion is not only recycled back into the economy, but their developments, the discoveries they make. If they can make technology that can keep us alive on the moon, on Mars, anywhere, they can use that technology to help us survive on Earth. The technology, if they can survive in an extremely hot habitat, that's that technology, the equipment they use to keep an environment cool and within, safe, livable conditions, can be repurposed, made cheaper, and made available through NASA, which is one of the amazing things about it. Is everything they make is publicly available to the publicly available. It's not copyrighted. It's not hidden behind some patent. It's always available for others to build upon, to expand upon, to make cheaper, and to make available. So it's one of the biggest things about space exploration, and the same goes for trying to go to Mars. If we can do that, then we can truly develop so much more for us on Earth.
Yeah, I mean, just I talk to some people, and they talk about great things happening, not in their lifetime or their children's lifetime, but their children's lifetime. And it seems to me that that kind of discussion makes people believe that kind of advancement's almost impossible, and they just kind of hope it's possible in the future, as opposed to really making it happen now. And I guess what do you see as being like the challenges to, say, a city on Mars? I mean, like, what are the kind of like the things that enable us to get there? What's your thoughts?
The biggest challenges, we've overcome most of them. We just need to master long duration surface stay, since the longest we've had during Apollo was only, I think, a day or two. But I think we can easily overcome that. We still need in situ resource. We need to prove that can work. But most of these challenges are just small. They're just small steps that need to build the whole picture. So if we can do that, then 100 people on Mars doesn't seem too crazy. If we can keep 10 alive and just put another module down, make it 20, then make it 30, it's going to be slow, and I hate to say it, but it's going to be a very perilous journey. There will be, our path to success will be laid on the sad loss of lives, because this technology and this research is just too cutting edge, and some of them might fall off that edge. But it's a sad fact, knowing space exploration and how dangerous it is. But I'm sure with each and every one of, again, I wish we could avoid it, but with those losses, we can build and get to that point at Mars. And hopefully I'm wrong, and we can do this in the safest way possible, which is, what NASA is trying to do is, trying to keep it cutting edge, but stay just far enough behind the edge that there's no real, the danger is, less significant. Can't say it's not there. It's always going to be. And if we can do all that, we can keep it safe, and we can just one, two, just small increments in the population, there's nothing stopping us from doing that. There's no big hurdle. And that, I will admit, to your comment about it always being, the next generation, and that has been the problem, is that I think personally our society just isn't mentally ready to see ourselves in that light. We think, because culturally we see ourselves as behind that curve. We need to change that, our perspective, our vision of ourselves, to understand that not only are we, but we will be, that it's just right in front of us. It's not 100 years in the future. It's not Star Trek, 1,000 years from now. It's right around the corner if we just put forth that effort and take those steps.
And I kind of picked on the same thing culturally that you had through these interviews. For a lot of people, they just go about their daily business. They're sort of in the habit of life, and it's just about small incremental improvements. And somehow the really big leaps either come from outside or other people or from future generations. How what do you think is required to kind of change our view of ourselves so that we're actually pushing for these types of advancements?
It's actually a very good question because personally, I think our society, the way it works, from my perspective of history, is that we get massive leaps like we've had in the last century during the 20th century, but afterwards we need a period of 100 to 200 years of renaissance to reimagine ourselves because and it's going to definitely be difficult because that renaissance may be a longer period of time for us to be able to rebuild our vision of ourselves because our world is literally changing. Within 10 years we're having the developments what would take a century, and millennia past. It's just we are making such huge leaps. It's hard to say how long it'll take for us to leave this era of renaissance, but once we get to that point where our society can mature, because as major events happen, we as a society, we have to emotionally process how things happen, how, what does this mean for us, and then be able to integrate it and be able to build onto newer future events. And now what could cause those things, it's hard to say. I think the biggest thing is time. Allowing future generations to see and understand and input their opinions, input their actions and their impact on the world. But it could also be a significant event, say a landing on Mars, that could help snap the world into that realization. It's hard to say as history repeats itself, but history itself is not a fixed point of view. It always changes and it's always fluid.
Yeah, and you were talking about the loss of life before and kind of our ability to accept that or prevent that. It almost seems like loss of life is inevitable, because, regardless of best intentions, you always have that asteroid that hits you. You always have that sickness. You always have that piece of vital equipment that breaks down you can't replace. And it seems unavoidable. But, when it comes to space, it's like with a death, everything is put on hold, whereas there's so many other activities where we have deaths, but we just kind of take them in strides, like the Max 737 airplane, are automobile accidents, are people on amusement park rides. It's you don't quite have the same put the brakes on everything. I was just wondering why you thought that was, and what would it take for us to get to that same point when it goes to exploring the solar system.
And to reiterate, you want me to answer why I think that we will lose life, or?
What would it take for us to take it in stride as opposed to completely stopping everything and taking a break?
To get to that point, one of the first issues is our space flight are still our heroes. They're still very much Mercury 7. They are the best of the best of the best is how our society sees them. And when they go, it's literally like seeing Superman or some, super significant figure go. And to get to that point, I think we need to reach it where we're seeing hundreds of people to go to space flight a day, because I'm trying to think of another industry where that is where you see a death and it impacts it so intensely. But even significant celebrities don't have the same kind of impact, because with Space Shuttle Challenger, the whole nation wept, and that's a very rare sight. You don't have a united mourning like that. It just doesn't happen that often. So it's kind of hard to answer what other industry or what other group would have that kind of impact?
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting. Even with the Columbia disaster, we still had astronauts on the International Space Station. We were still sending them up to space in the Soyuz during that time. So maybe it's just a matter of getting further entrenched in space where fully retreating is not a possibility.
Yeah. Um, and like I said, the more routine these space flights become, the less impacting they will be. Now, that again, it never means they'll go away because we still view them as the best. But as our standards for being an astronaut reduce, the more commonplace it is, once it gets to a point where it's just like, my friend knows an astronaut, or my relative is an astronaut, by that point, the significance of the role will have diminished. Now, not to say that it will never be an impressive role, similar to, it'll just become more in line with like a fighter pilot or someone of an extreme occupation, climbing Mount Everest or something to that kind.
Yeah. Well, talking about the city on Mars, you have like the technical issues and you have the political issues and economic issues, but you also have this planetary protection issue where some people are like, we really shouldn't be sending people to Mars at all because, they'll contaminate it. And there's like untold there's science that could be there if we left it pristine. I was wondering how you approach that subject.
I mean, that is kind of true that we will be quote unquote contaminating it, though it is a bit late, seeing as we've been sending dozens of spacecraft. Now, there are parts of Mars that would definitely be best left alone. For example, the poles, as any possible chance for life to be left there would be on the poles. And those would be the locations most prone for us to cause damage or cause, potential impact on the planet's nature. However, the fact is, we've done intensive research and intensive investigation into that planet, and there's not much there for us to impact. And it's the gains we get from exploring and actually putting our feet down on Mars versus the potential impact on disturbing something is far, we gain more than we do risk damaging something, because we've already done research with Curiosity, and I already know the new Mars 2020 rover is going to be doing incredible research on its new location that it'll be landing on. But I know that they won't be landing anywhere that the rover will be causing any impact, especially since we haven't perfected sterilization technology to a point that we can guarantee that it is truly sterile. We have not mastered it, which is why we've not sent anything to the poles to look for life, because we already know the likelihood of getting a false positive is just too significant.
But what do you think about Robert Zubrin's argument that the life on Mars, if it originated there, would be fairly distinct, and even if we did contaminate it, it would still be distinguishable from life that may have come from Earth, in the same way that you have no question about French people existing in Paris whenever you go and visit there. Is sort of like the analogy that he uses. I was just wondering what you thought about that argument.
That is a very good point. And it may even be difficult for us to even find life if it's too foreign, because our parameters for life, quote unquote, is very narrow and admittedly very self-focused, you could say, because we only expect to see something similar to ourselves, something cell-based, but it may not be the case. And you're absolutely right. It might not even have any impact, but the big thing I see is, if there's Mars life, I don't think we're going to have too much of an issue as long as we keep distance and we maintain sterilization practices, and once we perfect it. But I think one big factor that I don't hear a lot of people discussing is how, even if there isn't life out there, let's say, what is it called? That one paradox about life and how it has to reach the curve. Even if, assuming that's true, once we get to Mars, once we get to say Venus in the future, and we get to, decades and decades down the line, even Earth bacteria will begin to evolve. Humans will evolve to match their environments, and we will begin to actually reach to a point where humans will become very distinct to each of their planets. Humans on Venus might be, would have a stronger bone structure, while on Mars it would be weaker due to the weaker gravity. And those changes would very much encourage evolution, especially if we stayed so far away. Because right now, the way that Mars and the other planets are set up is no different than the exploration of the New World with, Christopher Columbus. It took them months, and it takes us nearly a year to get to Mars at a minimum. So those distances very much can encourage changes to ourselves, which can lead to us literally becoming aliens to ourselves. It's admittedly that's kind of a crazy thought I've been carrying. So,
well, I've had a similar thought too. Have you ever read H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds?
I'm familiar with it. I think I've read some parts of it.
I'm just amazed that around, like, this book was written around like the 1900s, before rockets were even really contemplated or built in any meaningful way. And its description of what Mars is like, it seems to be in line with what's been proved out by our on-site observations, and it's just kind of amazing. But he talks about the story about the Martians looking at the Earth and seeing it as like a garden spot to be conquered over, and it seems kind of unrealistic that there's Martians there today that would be able to do that, despite maybe that HP printer commercial where you have them printing out anyway, it's really cute. But to your point, if you imagine you get the city on Mars, you imagine something happens on Earth that causes like decay and the loss of our space capabilities and decline of civilization, and some miracle that civilization on Mars is able to survive. They're going to be a much more rugged set of individuals than the people on Earth. And you could imagine them at some point going, hey, I don't know why Earth is wasted on these kind of backward folks. And you really do have an invasion from Mars, but it's really us from the future.
Exactly, yeah.
I was wondering what you thought about that scenario.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right, and that's one of the big things about developing a city on Mars, is that right now, with current space practices, with looking at the Apollo spacecraft, because the ISS kind of falls under a very different category, but with Apollo, those astronauts were American. They were following American laws. They were following, they were part of the American space program. But once you get to Mars, they don't follow those same rules, because if they break some regulation or they break an American law, there's no one to stop them. They're very much their own organization. They're their own collection of people, and they can create their own governments. And again, history repeats itself. They can turn themselves into the new world and create their own entity, their own government, if they wanted to, because we simply cannot control them. We can give them rules and regulations, but they are very much the only ones that can enforce it and put it into practice, because without those regulations, we have no control. They are, like I said, they are their own group of people, and that I expect that to happen. I expect for there to be a slight revolt. I don't know if it's going to be exactly as bad as the Revolutionary War, but I would expect that there would be a revolt, because control from an entity 100, millions of miles away just doesn't work.
Absolutely. The only way it works is if you're absolutely dependent upon that entity, and for food and water and air and technology.
And that's only temporary. If we're going to make a serious city, it's got to be self-sustaining.
Absolutely. And I kind of imagine, I wonder what would it take to create a small enough version of society that would be self-sustaining, that you could actually transplant to Mars. I wonder what that would look like. And do you have any thoughts?
The smallest size, I would expect it to be It's kind of hard to say because there's so many different roles in society that arguably could be said are crucial. You know, doctors, they're important. Psychologists, they are important, but are they required? Are they a necessity? Could their role not be included into another? So I could say maybe down to 10 people could be a self-sustaining group. Would it last long? Maybe not. It would need either need a change of crew, because eventually you just need new people. And I think I read a study once that said that especially if you're looking for a colony that, repopulates itself and grows on Mars, I think heard somewhere that it said around, I think 800 people for the best chance for genetic diversity. So, and I would need to again see that study. It's been forever, but it's a couple hundred people to account for all the genetic diversity and to ensure that you get the best results.
Yeah, but I mean, there are ways to kind of augment the genetic diversity beyond the actual people that are there. Um, so I mean, in terms of like genetic diversity, we probably could bring every gene that humanity's ever, developed with us in some form that could then be used. But in terms of the actual skills and the organization and, I mean, my life, I think, probably depends on several million people working in harmony, and just, any chain that you like go through, there's hundreds of other people that kind of contribute to that in terms of providing the food, the energy, the resources. How do you kind of create a small enough set of technologies that are self-sustaining to put into a bottle to send someplace?
Um, yeah. And one thing that would help is that a lot of roles on Earth can be automated on Mars. We don't quite need a human doing all of them, but again, some roles just can't be. You can maybe create a robot that can do inspections and repairs, but a doctor or a psychologist, as I mentioned, you can't. Those are very human. They require emotion. They require investigation to do proper, provide proper care and attention to the task that requires a human. And again, you can get a smaller crew by doing that, but at the same time, you need eventually there needs to be a human at the end of it to inspect the machine. Even if it's a machine inspecting a machine, you still need a human there to ensure it's operating properly and to be trained to repair it if it need be. Um, Not only that, but you also need some sort of people to have some sort of leadership. As a true democracy is an effective means, but without direction, a democracy can be kind of aimless, as sometimes people don't know what's the best for themselves. The people don't know what's best for the people.
Or even worse, you have a left side of the street versus right side of the street problem to drive on that ultimately comes down to probably very minor factors or preferences. You don't want to waste all your energy trying to decide that when it's just better to make one decision and stick with it.
Exactly. And the worst part is there are multiple ways you can fix a problem, and that left versus right is very true. Do you want to take it, say, in a more extreme approach, or do you want to take it more subtly? And this even comes down to modern technology with, do you want the more immediate approach with SpaceX, or do you want the more subtle approach with SLS? It goes, it's not a future problem, but one we're experiencing today.
And what do you think about some people are like, that aren't really thinking that space colonization is practical or even desirable, and that if it's just scientific and exploration, why not just send robotic probes? Why are we sending humans? So how do you approach that?
Robots are very capable, but they are only ever second. They are only able to do it second best to man. Studies have been done and they have found that humans can do like 3 to 4, maybe even 5 times more in the same amount of time as a robot can. Humans are 100 times more versatile. They're 100 times more capable of taking care of themselves and repairing things. Um, and they are also able to humans can also bring a lot of inspiration. And like I said before, the technology they bring, the technology we use to develop on Mars, we can bring home, but we can't do that if we don't have any way to survive on Mars. We don't develop anything from Mars. We on Earth don't get any benefit. It's Apollo brought forth so many technologies that we still use today, but I can't say the same for Curiosity, despite its many achievements and its many discoveries. It's just it hasn't brought anything that we can use on Earth.
Well, and I wonder if that has so much to do with robotics versus human, as opposed to doing something that's never been tried before and having to develop a whole technological base to support it versus being able to leverage an existing technological base. Even if we send people back to the moon, it won't require the same amount of development that we needed to support Apollo. It won't be that new thing. So I mean, how would you try to convince somebody that it's going to result in similar types of technological advances?
Well, I think the biggest thing is I would just start pointing to the things that NASA has already done, because to predict new technology is kind of a very hard task. It's trying to prove something uphill. You have to do more work to prove it than you would if you could just look back. NASA has helped massively with dialysis machines, with MRIs. NASA has done so much. They've even worked to help with sterilization practice. I also heard that NASA recently, in the last few months, unveiled a new, I think it's a ventilator that's supposed to help with COVID-19. They're just constantly in motion trying to build new technologies, but none of these things wouldn't be possible if we couldn't test them and put them into practical use, in space. And some of the, even if for less things that don't come to benefit us on Earth, we do incredible research into combustion on the ISS. We couldn't do that on Earth. We can't do that anywhere else. And if we can do that there, I just imagine what we could do free from Earth's magnetosphere, because we're still limited what we can do on the ISS. What we can do on the moon is even greater. We can start harvesting the moon's resources, and we can start to actually use it and explore in ways that we never have before. And the best part about the moon is what we discover about the moon is very much in tune with what we discover about the Earth. Because as we understand and discover the moon's history, we can also learn about the Earth's. As we learn the Earth, we can maybe try to help understand why the Earth does certain things. And it's the biggest limitation on our understanding of the Earth is we only understand the Earth from our perspective of what we can see, and that's only half the picture, because the Earth, existed before life, even before some of the tectonic plates that we can try to, image and try to piece together. It's just not enough of a picture. We need, and we need to view it from another source, another side.
Yeah, definitely. And, one of the big outcomes of human exploration into space, or even just space explorations, it's kind of like a better perspective of where the Earth is in terms of the solar system and how fragile it is and how really small humanity's existence is compared to what the potential. And I thought one reason why we should send people instead of robots is that if you ever try to take a picture of a really tall building and then you show that picture to somebody, they have no idea, like it doesn't feel tall, right? But standing by that building, you can feel it. And
Yes,
I feel like
yeah. Always trying to piece some together. Like I've always heard the Grand Canyon is massive and the pictures don't do it justice. And yeah, I could definitely see where you're saying with that.
yeah, and maybe if we had a better idea on exactly how small and perilous our existence is on Earth, it would give us the foundation to allow for us to come together, to work together, to have a better future for all. So, another thing I was thinking about with these videos was, Astrobotics has that DHL Moonbox
Hmm.
program where you can send something to the moon on their mission next summer. And I was thinking about taking all these videos and putting it on like a micro SD card and sending them to the moon. But, I don't think it would actually be readable after exposure to radiation and the heat and the cold and all of that. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on a way to sort of send the sets of videos that I had so far to the moon in a way that would be recoverable, maybe 50 years, 100 years from now.
My best answer would be, and it's not going to be an easy answer because it's the most durable method of data keeping data is sadly analog physical representations of the information. For example, like Voyager 1's golden vinyl record, that's probably very much still intact and very much readable, while if we put something like that on New Horizons, the digital format would, as you said, degrade. Now there are digital analog formats. If you go back and look in history, Laserdisc is an analog form. The discs are huge and heavy, but they can store large amounts of information. And if you were to use, say, a higher quality disc and maybe try to implement some of the new laser technology, it could possibly be readable while still being analog data that would not degrade as long as the disc doesn't. Another option is you could it's kind of hard because, again, I'm trying to think, but you could try. Sorry, I am kind of trying to think about that.
Yeah, I think about those crystals where you have like the laser etching inside. I'm just wondering if you could maybe do that at a smaller level and figure out some way to like encode digital stuff in like a little crystal.
That is technology. Science says that that's right around the corner. As to whether or not to be practical, it's still yet to be proven, but it definitely has a lot of promise.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about the commercial lunar payload services program?
It's definitely going to bring the moon closer than ever before, especially with Orion carrying so many. That's going to make allow colleges to finally develop their own hardware and research technology that can reach further than ever before and do more than any other space exploration effort from such small entities. Because before it was very much limited to, you had to run it through NASA. You have to get it on a NASA rocket, and although you still do, it's more open. It's more there are less regulations to it. Just a matter of making sure it fits, as opposed to worrying about weight and its mass and trying to figure out where it fits. For example, like on the lunar module.
Yeah. It's pretty neat. We had a guy from Intuitive Machines come and talk to our National Space Society chapter here in Houston last December. And at our meeting in August, we're having Astrobotics join us virtually to talk about their things. But it's really neat having like these little small companies with like their own services of delivering things to the moon, and NASA really being like the foundation customer, but then them able to have some innovative things around it. I think it's going to be good. I hope we're able to stick with it for the next decade or so.
Yeah, and like I said, it's definitely an exciting time for us.
So if it was safe and affordable, would you go into space?
Oh, definitely. In fact, I've been working with some others online to help develop my own rocket company. But considering my young age, it is definitely a challenge, especially since it is still expensive. But where I probably 4 or 5 years ago, I designed my own one-manned reusable crew capsule. I don't exactly have the numbers on it, but I had done the design. I had scoped out what would be used and what the structure would be, and aside from rocket, the rocket is kind of irrelevant because once it gets up there, it would go up to altitude, return, land, and be reused. So, and concerning the materials it would use, those materials are hardy enough they would be able to refly maybe a dozen or 2 dozen times as long as there isn't significant damage.
That is pretty awesome. Yeah, if you look at Rocket Labs, that was really unexpected, and in New Zealand too. It's just like
Yeah. And
I
that's
mean,
the big thing is as space becomes larger, it's going to become more accessible, and that's going to make all the difference.
indeed. Um, well, if there was an option to colonize Mars, do you see yourself among the colonists?
I would choose the moon first personally because Mars is great, but I feel it's a little overrated because at least with the moon, I still get a view of home. But on Mars, Earth is just a blue star. It's not more significant than anything else. But on the moon, home is very much still right around the corner. You can still see it in all its beautiful detail.
And I think if we're able to get enough development on the moon that it was actually somehow visible from Earth, I think that would have a huge psychological impact on the world.
Yeah, and
Whereas,
that's what I said. It would possibly cause a reawakening in society in that renaissance I mentioned before.
yeah, almost, I was thinking, you could have a rover of like a lens
Mhm.
that would use the sun's beams to like essentially etch something into the lunar surface. And, you could put like a smiley face or hi.
Well, trying to avoid that commercialization, but yeah, I mean that could very much happen. In the same way we have skywriting now.
Yeah. Well, was there any topic that you wanted to talk about that we didn't touch on?
Not really. I mean, you pretty much answered all the significant points I have today. I mean, the only other thing I really want to mention is, I mean, I like to go on rants about, SpaceX topics, but not unless it's significant. I don't want to bring anything into this that you don't have time for.
Oh, I got plenty of time.
All right.
So I
Well,
got
I
as much
mean,
time as
actually, I
you
am kind of
have.
running out myself. Would it be possible to pick this up in a few hours?
Sure.
Okay, then. Well, it has certainly been, a very enlightening discussion. I've been so glad, looking forward to this for so long.
Well, thanks. I'll send you my phone number. You could just give me a call or text when you want to pick it up.
All right, then. Thank you. And hopefully my webcam will start working again.
Sounds good, Mike. Okay,
All
well,
right.
you have a good day then.
You too. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.